Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome back for the final day of mLearn 2013. We're going to start today off with our featured panel discussion, and the topic of our panel discussion is on lessons learned from tablet deployment programs in higher education and K-12 schools. We have 6 panel members with us this morning, and I'm going to ask each of them to give us just a brief 60-second introduction of who they are and what type of projects they've been working on with tablet deployment. And we'll jump right into our questions. I have a list of questions here up on the screen already that have been pre-submitted from our audience members and voted on as well. So we'll start from the most popular question and work our way down. And if we have time, then we can field some additional questions from the audience. And you're also free to go straight on to the site and post questions yourself during the session. The direct link is just mlearn13.idea.informer.com. So I'm going to start on this side here with Alexander Stein and ask him to give us a brief introduction.
Sorry, my voice is usually very loud, so I wanted to be careful. My name is Alexander Stein. I work at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in Qatar. I work in the IT department as user support specialist. That's probably not particularly interesting to you. What I do focus on for the last year and a half, 2 years, has been a pilot project with iPad deployment to anywhere between 10 to 40 students from semester to semester. In different classes and pushing content to them. And there have been lots of positives and negatives, and I will obviously probably talk about that throughout. So,
Hi, I'm Virginia Jones. I'm AJ's colleague. I'm an instructional designer at Georgetown, and as such, I headed up the pilot, which we, different perspectives on the pilot. We had provided iPads to any faculties who were interested. We've rolled out a set of about 20 iPads to our academic services office for academic support purposes, and as AJ mentioned, we've rolled out on an as per request iPads to courses, and we've done a little bit of feedback and research and gotten some interesting content information from our students, and kind of deciding where we're going to go forward from this point on.
Hi, my name is Sheree McLeod. I'm in the Teaching and Learning Center here at this institution, College of the North Atlantic-Qatar. We've done one small iPad in the classroom pilot over 2 semesters, and we have iPads in our Advanced Learning Technology Center and in our Health Sciences Department that are available for loan, but we don't have a large deployment at this time. We do have students who carry up to 3 mobile phones on them at all times, and so there's lots of opportunities for that kind of mobile device use in our classrooms, but also we haven't yet made a real deployment in that area. Those are all student-chosen devices. We're now building our capacity to support those devices. Our infrastructure hasn't quite caught up with the demands.
And good morning. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Muhammad Ali from Athabasca University in Canada. I spend quite a bit of time supervising doctoral students. It seems these days a lot of doctoral students want to do their dissertation on mobile learning. So I'm actually supervising about 6 dissertations and 2 master's theses on mobile learning. In addition to that, I have a few mobile learning projects. I'll mention a few. And a major one is actually in Qatar. I'm working on a project with Qatar University. I'm the lead researcher. Qatar Petroleum, Qatar Wildlife Innovation Center. And what we are doing is we are designing courses and doing the research on training Qatar Petroleum employees to improve their English. So it's a major project in the country of Qatar. It's a QNRF project. I'm working on a project in in Zambia, where we are getting the people in Zambia, the health professionals, to access health information using tablets. And these people live in the rural area, so the best way for them to access information is wireless mobile devices. Also, I'm working on a project in the country of Ghana, where we are looking at training physician assistant using tablet computers. Again, these people live in remote locations, and the only way to access training is using the tablet computers. And another major research project is at my university, where we are looking and see how our students who are located in different countries, how they use tablet computers, mobile, when they take the courses, and how they interact with each other.
Good morning. I'm Christina Gitsaki, and I work for the Higher Colleges of Technology, which is based in the United Arab Emirates. Our colleges have employed the use of iPads for the teaching of English in our academic bridging program. The program has 6,200 students and over 300 teachers. And we have finished our first year of the project and just entered our second year of the project. And I've shared quite a few of our experiences and the lessons we learned with you yesterday in my talk. Thank you.
My name is Giovanni Farias. I'm an independent consultant on distance learning. And I joined to the doctoral program in distance education of Athabasca University, and I'm researching on the deployment process of tablet computers in Brazil, in high school systems of Brazil that involves almost 1 million tablet deployment. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We'll get right into our questions here. The first question, the most popular one so far, was submitted by Marcus Songrum, and I'll bring up the details of it. So the topic is on bring your own device strategies and inequality issues. So Marcus asks, how do educators and institutions employing a bring your own device strategy handle issues of inequality? Often a majority of students in a class already own smartphones, tablets, or portable computers, but in many cases there are a minority that don't own this type of equipment due to cost and other resources, and they are in the risk of becoming or feeling excluded. Are there ways to handle this issue? So I guess I will start over on this side with Giovanni. Do you have any insights into this question?
Well, so far, we've been the propagation of apps for mobile device. So you have apps for iPhone, apps for Android, apps for Windows phones or Windows device, etc. But actually, I believe in what was said yesterday here by someone, I don't remember exactly who. The importance of the apps in the mobile scenario tends to be reduced, and it must be substituted by HTML5 technology, because there are a lot of corporate interests on this. We have around 3,000 carriers around the world that they are putting money in research to develop the HTML5 standard to access the hardware of the device. And once this standard be ready, basically everything that an app can do in a mobile phone or in a tablet, it will be possible to be done by a code, a HTML5 code. So I guess when you have content, applications based on HTML5, and you have an adaptive design, user interface design, you can overcome any kind of difficulty regarding difference between hardware. The hardware will mean almost nothing in terms of standardization.
I think too that part of the heart of what Marcus was asking here too is, what about those students who don't have a device at all when you're using a BYOD approach? Is there any insight on how to deal with the inequality between the students who do have their own device, and as we've seen here in Qatar, sometimes multiple devices, and those who do not have a device at all? Dr. Ali, I'm going to field the question towards you this time, since you seem to be involved in so many different projects. Has this issue come up in your various projects?
Yes, it came up a few times, but we are talking about e-textbook now, electronic textbook, where students, rather than buying a physical textbook, paper textbook, they will have electronic textbook. And if you don't have a mobile device, a tablet computer, you cannot access the electronic textbook. So I think students will have to have, all students will have to have a mobile device, a tablet computer. And the savings that they get from not having to buy the physical textbook, which is quite expensive compared to the electronic textbook, they can use that money to buy the actual tablet computers. And that's what I'm recommending to governments. Move away from printed textbook, from physical textbook to e-textbook, which is much cheaper. And also they should look at open education resources where the students don't have to buy textbook. They can use the money to buy the tablet computers. But I think the inequality is actually the connectivity, not the device, because the device is cheap. You can actually buy a good tablet computer from Brazil, from China for $70 US. So I think the real inequality is the connectivity once the students have the device.
For some of our panelists from this neck of the woods, has this been an issue that you've seen on your campuses with students who are bringing their own devices? Cherie, I'll field the question to you first, because you did mention about the number of students here on our campus who bring their own devices. Have instructors from our campus approached you about any inequality issues or concerns about that?
Well, actually, nobody has approached me about the problem, but when I did some research here on the campus maybe 3 years ago, I did a large survey of our students and asked them what kind of mobile devices they had and how many they had and what kind of uses it could be. Like, could they make, what did they do with it, I mean? Did they make movies or send email, that kind of thing? There were very, very few students who didn't have some kind of device, very limited. And when I was in the classroom here myself, I found maybe one student per class wouldn't have a smartphone. They might have a phone, but not a smartphone. So for an activity that requires a smartphone, it's easy to pair people up. Almost all our students here have access to computing devices in other locations, even if they don't have a mobile device or a smartphone. We have labs here on campus. Most people have at least one computer in the family. So the inequality exists maybe at the classroom level when you want to do an activity if somebody doesn't have a device. But everybody here has access in some way.
Okay, Virginia, I noticed you had some insight.
I was going to speak regarding all the Education City institutions. We did a survey about 3 years ago with EDUCAUSE, and I think at that time laptop adoption was in the like 99%. Smartphones, more than one smartphone, was well up in the 80s. But what we didn't have a lot of adoption of, it was less than 20% adoption of tablet devices. That was 3 years ago. I've done a survey of our incoming freshmen, and we're looking at more than 80% adoption of, they all own tablet devices, or they have a tablet device. In our pilot, we provided the tablets to all the students. And we do have students who make a request who don't have access, and we do provide. But all the Education City schools at least provide a laptop to all of their students. So in our educational community over HBKU, you're not looking at lack of access, it's almost an abundance of access. And then you've just got to address those few that don't have the access, and it's just part of the resources that we provide them.
Okay, so I think the consensus here seems to be that the inequality issues are starting to disappear because there's more and more ownership, that we're looking more now, instead of at access to a device, we're looking at access to connectivity and cross-platform functionality. Alexander, does that seem to be an issue from your perspective on the technical side?
Personally, I mean, I'm on the implementation side, and I only see people who have problems with their devices typically. Ginny can probably correct me on this, but I think so far I've only seen one person. We actually have a pilot program where we provide the devices, so obviously because at the time it was a pilot, we leveled the playing field, so this doesn't really apply to us. I only have one person give one back, saying they would prefer to use their own, and it was of the same device and model. So for them, it just wasn't worth carrying too. That's probably a very different case than in pilot projects that other people are doing, where it's for education in places with obviously not so much abundance and resources, I would assume. But that seems fairly consistent. So the connectivity issue being, and a content issue being more important at this stage, I guess that I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to our next question. Which is, what is the greatest barrier to adoption? What has been the greatest barrier to institutional adoption or deployment of tablet devices? Has it been technical, financial, administrative, or cultural? And has one type of barrier been seen more consistently than others by different institutions? So I'll start on this side this time with Ginny and Alexander for their perspectives from Qatar Foundation.
Well, I think part of it depends on the curriculum or the focus of a curriculum. We're a social science institution with our School of Foreign Service. So most of our content, or the texts that our faculty use, are current books and readings. And so we don't have the traditional text, and so we don't end up getting e-text from publishers. We have to kind of hunt and peck for the sources that our faculty want to use. And that may mean that a student has 4 or 5 texts for a single class, and if you're going to provide that digitally, those 4 or 5 texts might come from 3 or 4 different providers. And just how you manage the content push is probably our greatest barrier. And if you multiply that across more than a class of 20, and across a student body of 300, when they're probably looking at a variety of 10 to 15 texts a semester, and trying to figure out how to gift that, or to, when every provider has their own way of providing access or purchasing, it gets complicated, let alone the management of them on the actual devices. And that's also because at Qatar Foundation, our students are provided their materials, their course materials, their texts. It's not something they can go out and purchase for themselves. And because of our location, even if we wanted to try and maybe reimburse students for the cost of the text, because they don't all have U.S. Addresses and credit cards, being able to purchase things from U.S. providers becomes a problem. So location and content and variety of content is probably our biggest barrier.
Okay, thank you. Cherie, you mentioned that initiatives here at CNAQ have been slightly smaller scale over the past few terms. And speaking from experience here at the college myself, I know what I've seen in terms of tablet or mobile device adoption in the classroom has been a fairly ad hoc process. You find some early adopter instructors such as myself or you who are playing around with our own experiments in the classroom with mobile devices. What would you say is the greatest barrier to adoption that we've seen here at CNAQ?
I think I'd have to say it's our connectivity, because if you use a device in your classroom and the access is slow, or problematic, it's unlikely that you'll want to continue using it, or the students will get frustrated. And we're trying very hard now, our IT operations department is trying very hard to build our capacity so that we won't have that kind of problem. That's the basic. You have to have that, or you can't really do anything.
That seems to echo the sentiments of Dr. Ali, that it's not a technology issue, it's a connectivity issue. Dr. Ali, what would you say has been the greatest barrier to adoption that you've seen in different countries?
People. People is the biggest barrier. Especially teachers are actually coming around now, especially the young teachers, because they're comfortable using mobile devices. But I can see the barrier from senior administration within schools, universities, and government, because they can't comprehend how you can use a tablet computer to learn. So we need to change our attitude. We need to have some successful projects, and we say, here are the benefits for the project. So I think people is the biggest barrier. Another barrier is, if you really think about it, the mobile devices were designed for other sectors, like the BlackBerry was designed for business, the iPhone, the earlier iPhone iPod was designed for entertainment, and we tend to start using these devices for education, but they were not built for education. So I think they have some limitations, and because of that, it's very, very difficult to adopt those for education. So we need to build tablet computers, mobile devices for education so that we can actually use it for education rather than take what other sectors and just trying to fit it into education. So I think that's another barrier.
Thank you, Mohammed. Christina.
Yes. Well, adoption of educational technology is a process, and I think there are so many different stages in this process, and each stage has its own challenges. And some of the challenges that this panel has mentioned are particular to a specific stage of the process. For example, you do need at the beginning to put the infrastructure and the connectivity in place, otherwise the best device will just simply not work properly. And then once you do have the infrastructure in place, finding the best way to put all the different apps that you need on student devices. And some of the problems that Virginia mentioned, we faced very early on in our adoption of the iPads. At the next stage, when we did put the teachers in the classroom, even after we had provided enough PD for them to make them ready, to feel ready for teaching, the resources for us was a huge challenge. And then we had to find ways to make do with resources that were not really ready for the device that we were using them with. And having overcome all those different challenges at the stage that we are now, assessment is our biggest challenge right now, how to test our students through the iPad and ensure the security of our assessment. So that the students cannot go outside our testing environment and browse the internet and then come back and provide the right answer or a superbly written essay that they cut and paste from the internet. So we are working very hard now to solve this issue, and I'm sure that as we move on to the next stage of our iPad adoption, we will face other challenges as well. So I'll keep you posted as our project progresses.
Thank you, Christina. I can imagine, too, that the whole assessment issue would be an even greater obstacle if you're talking about a BYOD approach, because then you're talking about cross-platform and security. From my own perspective, it would be easy to disconnect all connectivity in a room and provide the testing materials on a micro SD card that they put in their device and hand them back in at the end of the session. But iPads don't have expandable capability like that. Other tablets might use a different platform, so I can see some serious issues there. Giovanni, you presented a couple of days ago here about your project, your research in Brazil, and you mentioned some of the obstacles that the Brazilian education system is facing. Can you give us some insight on the greatest barriers to adoption in Brazil?
Well, there are different barriers, but I have to agree with Professor Ali that among all of them, the greatest is the human factor. Because connectivity, content, technology, you can overcome any difficulty with investment. But making people to learn and have good willing to use properly the mobile device as a pedagogical tool, it's not a matter only investment. Investment is important, but it's not enough. So we've got to have change of mindset in terms of how the device can be used properly for education purpose. And it takes time, a time that you cannot buy for it. You've got to wait and to make a lot of effort to train people, to make people experiment the methodology, wait for the results, and make the adjustment in order to have the learning outcomes that you desired since the beginning. And it takes a lot of time. And unfortunately, we are in a generation change because the most experienced teachers and educational administrators, they are in the middle age. Middle age, I mean 40, they are 40, 50 years old. And, well, they weren't born in the digital area. So they need to adapt their mindsets to this new era, and it takes time. It's not only a matter of investment. The human factor is very complex, and I guess once you overcome this difficulty, once people that are used to deal with the digital, you will be able to implement much faster and much easier any kind of digital paradigm. Unfortunately, it's not the reality just now.
Thank you, Giovanni. I seem to get the impression from the answers that we've received that the two biggest barriers so far are connectivity and the human factor. And the connectivity is probably the easiest issue to deal with. That's just a matter of throwing money at the problem. The human factor, not so easy.
I'll just expand on Giovanni's comment about the older people not using mobile devices. And I think it has to do with physiology. The screens are so small. So we have, I call it the physiology divide. The young people who have good senses, good eyesight, they can read it easily. Whereas the older people, you know, they have to have magnifying glass to read a small screen. So we have the physiology divide now, where the old people cannot use the mobile devices because of their eyesight, etc. And with things such as the virtual keyboard, where you can make the keyboard as large as possible, and the virtual screen, I think we will eliminate those problems.
Thank you very much. Our next question has to deal with which type of tablet we found works out best in tablet deployment programs. Has one particular type of tablet worked out better for institutions? I know that it seems like we hear about iPads being adopted the most. And what about with the learners? What type of tablet do they actually prefer to use? Or is a BYOD approach working out for institutions as the best way to go? So we'll start with our more technical experts, Alexander and Giovanni. So Alexander?
I get the question a lot of what computer should I buy? And people get upset because usually my first response is the computer that's appropriate for you. I'm not you. So the tablets and all kinds of mobile learning devices are not very far removed in this regard. I'm glad to hear other people, particularly framing it in the context of a project. I'm not sure how I do IT. I'm not an educator, but the idea of a project is like sacred in the IT world, and it has to be very organized, and you move through stages. And there are frameworks for this, like ITIL. The more organized you are about this in advance, and specifically in specifications, what are the minimum things you need to do with the device in a class are really important, and that really should dictate your choice. I can give you lots of anecdotes from people running deployments much larger than me that just bought a large number of devices for large institutions here, which will remain nameless, and then afterwards they tried to decide how to deploy it. That will not work, and you will be held accountable for the mistakes, and there will be, oh, so many. So my personal opinions, I'll keep aside about what I think about the iPad. I will tell you it is incredibly difficult. I also will give the personal caveat, I use Android devices, but I've never done mobile learning deployments with them ever. There are lots of restrictions on iPads, but I would say given that what we do at Education City, the more content-driven you are, books and other material that's from third parties, the chance of you being able to distribute it easily on an iPad is almost impossible. I didn't say distributing is impossible. I said doing it easily is almost impossible. So unless you have the ability to hire large groups of people to manage it for you, and I'm only doing 40, and it's a major headache, it will continue to be a problem as it goes on. If you're just interested in apps and you have people with cash flow and inequality isn't a problem, then maybe higher end devices on either the Android or iOS spectrum is acceptable to you. But it really does depend on what you decide to do in the classroom. And picking a device before you pick the use case is basically the recipe for disaster, and I see that pretty frequently. All the cool kids are doing it, why not?
Giovanni, I know that's a much larger scale deployment in Brazil, and we were chatting earlier this week. I know you mentioned that there are a couple of different providers for the tablets for the Brazilian program. What type of tablets are they using, and is there any rationale behind their decision for those tablets?
Well, they are using Android tablets, basically because they cannot comprehend how expensive can be an iPad, because you have a margin of profit very high when you buy an Apple device. Probably Apple product has a better quality than most of the Android device, but it doesn't justify the investment 2, 3, 4 times more to buy the equipment that will do basically the same. And as he said, it's much easier to use the Android device for certain kind of content installation than Apple product. So I have no doubt Apple still get the advantage of the innovation that the brand have been representing since middle of the last decade. But I think that we are in a turning point. The people start finding that Apple doesn't worth so the volume of investment that it demands for a tablet in deployment with iPad. It's just a matter of time. I guess Android will overcome iPad.
Okay, how about some of our professors from this neck of the woods? I'll start with Cherie in the middle here. Have you seen any particular type of tablet device? I know you're researching with iPads here, but is there any type of device that seems to be working better for these types of experiments here on campus?
Well, I actually don't have a straight answer for that. We did some research into the use of iPads because that was the request of one of our deans who wanted to use them in his department. And we haven't yet had an opportunity to do a real trial with any other devices. But I myself have started trialing personally Android because initially, aside from the shock and awe value of the iPad, how quickly it caught on, how many institutions have taken it up, we're a little bit behind and not ready to select. So we now have the option of a much larger choice than we did in 2010 when the iPads hit. And initially, I know when we first started to think about what we might look at, I thought the iPad has 500,000 apps And when I went to Google Play to look at the Android apps, they had 10. Now they have as many as Apple does. So I think it really is open, and it depends entirely on your budget and your needs. I don't think there's a best device. It's very open.
Christina or Virginia, do either of you have insights on this issue?
Well, I will say of those about 80% of our incoming freshmen who have tablets, tablet devices, the majority of them are Apple iPads, and that's just a choice of our students. We went with Apple initially just because, as Cherie said, when we looked at this 2 years ago, the app availability, it was just dominating. But we're not married to it, and particularly as we move forward, thinking in terms of BYOD, the flexibility. And as AJ has said, the management has not been the easiest of the process either.
Christina, any comments?
Experience has been with the iPad, so I am biased. But I do agree with Virginia that we're not married to the device. If something better comes along next year, we will be very open to adopting that one instead of the iPad. We at the higher colleges of technology pride ourselves at always trying to use what's the most innovative in terms of educational technology. So.
Okay, Mohammed, I know you've mentioned projects in various different parts of the world, including developed countries, where I would imagine that financial resources are more stretched than here in the Gulf. What type of tablets are they looking at, or is there any selection that's been made yet, or any criteria? Or?
Yeah, for the Ghana project, we decided to go with Android. And the reason is because it's much cheaper than Apple and not the iPad. That's one of the main reasons. The other reason is because, and actually Aga Palalas is involved in the project, and she went to to Ghana to help implement the project. And the other reason is because it has more flexibility, allows you to use more multimedia. So you're not limited to certain format for your videos and your graphics. Allows you to do good multimedia. So lower costs and more flexibility in terms of delivery of multimedia materials. At my university, we have 39,000 students in 85 different countries. So we cannot give them tablet computers. They all have their own tablet computers. So the challenge is, how do you design your courses for delivery on, and there are about 3,000 different mobile devices out there. How do you design for delivery on different mobile devices? So what we did in one of our projects, we actually built an intelligent agent that will detect the student device, and the system will actually format for that specific device. So I think we need to develop more intelligent agent and let students use their own device and just let the system design and deliver for that specific device. It's a good strategy to follow.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Martha. Please describe hidden costs in terms of time, materials, etc. With implementation of technology, there are requirements beyond the initial purchase of devices and software. So can you discuss